Welcome to Innovations and Breakthroughs with your host, Rich Goldstein, talking about the evolutionary, the revolutionary, the inspiration and the perspiration, and those aha moments that change everything. And now, here's your host, Rich Goldstein.
Rich Goldstein here, host of the Innovations and Breakthroughs podcast, where I feature top leaders and the path they took to create change. Past guests include Rick Cesari, James Thompson, and Steve Simonson. This episode is brought to you by my company, Goldstein Patent Law, where we help you to protect your ideas and products. We've advised and obtained patents for thousands of companies over the past 27 years. So if you're a company that has software, a product, or a design you want protected, go to goldsteinpatentlaw.com, where there are amazing free resources for learning about the patent process. And you could email my team at welcome@goldsteinpc.com to explore if it's a match to work together. You could also check out the book I wrote for the American Bar Association that explains in plain English how patents work. It's called the ABA Consumer Guide to Obtaining a Patent. I have with me here today Peter Sprague. Peter has done so many interesting things. Among them, when Aston Martin was on the verge of bankruptcy in 1975, and they shut their factories, he stepped in and put everyone back to work. He was also chairman of National Semiconductor for 30 years. His current project and passion is in providing tools for the deaf and hearing impaired. I'm very pleased to welcome here today Peter Sprague. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much, Rich.
So, go ahead.
No, it's just fascinating about patents because I have about a dozen patents. And on one of them, it's one of the reasons why you want a good patent attorney. So this is an advertisement you haven't paid me to deliver. But I invented a retroactive recording device for audio. And believe it or not, I got this patent. But when we wrote it, my patent attorney was in his early 70s. And when I wrote it for audio. If I'd thrown in video, if you took Moore's Law, anything you could do in audio would eventually be done in video. I was 6 weeks ahead of I'm forgetting the punchline, TiVo.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And TiVo has netted about $1 billion on their patent.
Mm-hmm.
And what was missing is when you think about patents, don't invent what you're thinking about now, invent it and everything else you think might happen in the next 17 years, which becomes challenging. If I'd remembered that, I wouldn't have $1 billion. But if I did, I'd have a longer yacht and a better family and an improved dog. But the fact of the matter is I could have harassed them into at least 100 million, because clearly my patent preceded their patent. It's a very simple idea. Just record everything that's happening and go back, and it can't self-cancels if you don't go back. You could do it with audio, and now everybody on your program does it with video. So get a good patent attorney. I actually have a new patent attorney, so I'm not your client. I'm just saying that the good patent attorneys make a difference.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, and the whole thing, and the whole lesson there too, is having imagination, is having the imagination to think not just of the problem it solves, but the problem that it may solve in the future, and kind of like what are the what is the out of the box notion of this invention? So you're looking at it through a certain set of constraints, but what's even beyond that? And then is it possible to cover that as well? So absolutely, I agree. Good patent attorneys make a difference. And I think what makes a difference is having some imagination outside of the box, either on the side of the inventor or even on the side of the patent attorney. But either way, it's like you have to think a little bit bigger than you're thinking right now to make the most out of it.
Well, I could ask you another question, oddly enough. The world used to be on when you invented, not when you filed.
Yes.
There was the famous case of the laser, which was solved 17 years after the patent was originally filed by a Nobel Prize winner. And I believe his student ended up winning, that he'd written a paper earlier, and the patent started again. In the first 17 years of the laser, nobody found anything useful to do with it. So the second 17 years was really important. So is the world improved with the first to file, or is the world
Exactly.
Is it better now?
It's better now. I mean, up until just a few years ago, the United States was the only country in the world that awarded the patent theoretically to the first to invent. There were some constraints on it. You had to not only have conceived of the invention earlier than the person who filed first at the patent office, but you also have to have been diligent towards moving it forward towards an actual invention. It's called reducing it to practice. And that's the way it was for a very long time. And the United States stood alone as the only country that was first to invent. But for, I think it's about 7 years now, we have we now follow the rest of the world with first to file. So now it's the first person to file the patent application that's entitled to the patent. So, one of the consequences of that is there's been rumor going around for more than 100 years of what's called a poor man's patent, where people would say, well, if you have an idea, this is what you do. You put it in an envelope and you mail it to yourself. And then the postmark will be proof of when you invented it. So if someone else files their patent, you'll be able to go into court with that envelope and show them, in a magical moment, you'll open the envelope and they'll say, oh, he invented it first. But you know what? It used to be hard to explain to people why that didn't work. I used to have to tell people, well, you're trying to get around the system, and why would they ever reward you for getting around for your attempt to hack the system? Now it's really simple. Now the answer just is it's a first to file system. So you could have 100 priests demonstrating that you or attesting to the fact that you invented it first. It just doesn't matter because that's not the law. The law doesn't follow the first to invent anymore. It follows the first to file.
But then you have a year after you file to actually catch up and file some additional ideas. So you can have a kind of limited idea, and then you can file an idea that probably wouldn't get a patent. And then you've got a year to basically improve your bright idea, because bright ideas are all around you. So somebody else is going to beat you to the patent office. So why shouldn't I get there first with my dismal bright idea and cast light on it later?
Yes. And what you're referring to there is a provisional patent application, which has been around since 1996, I believe. It basically gives you the ability to file an application to establish priority for your idea. And then it gives you another year to file what they call non-provisional patent application, or the utility patent application. So yeah, you could take that approach. And you could also do that too with a regular patent application. They don't give you a year technically, but it's kind of like a lot of times what people do is they file their initial patent application with their general concept. And while that application is working its way through the patent office, then if they make improvements, they file an additional application that points to the first one. We call it a continuation in part, where we're saying, hey, I've just filed a new patent application, but most of it I filed in a previous patent application a year and a half earlier. And part of it is new, but at least for the part of it that's like what I filed a year and a half ago, give me credit for the fact that I had the main concept a year and a half ago. So there's a couple of ways to go about that, but yeah, absolutely. You should get something filed.
Well, of course, I didn't sign on to interview you. You were going to interview me.
Well, it's really interesting. You came right out of the gate with a couple of questions for me, and I was like,
yeah, but the fact of the matter is, you're absolutely right. I mean,
yeah, you're doing a pretty good job of taking us in a direction here. So I guess let's roll it back then. So so it seems that you're a New Yorker.
Yeah, I guess so.
I noticed that
for about 50 years. I even ran for Congress against Ed Koch in New York.
And how would you do it?
I lost, thank God.
Right. No, I was just.
But I was
how am I doing?
I mean, I was the full-fledged Democrat candidate and a Republican candidate against Ed Koch, but I was a Republican you wouldn't recognize in the current Republican Party. In fact, I wasn't even a rhino. But I did run a fully honest political ad at the end of my campaign, full page in the Post, It won't make any difference whether you vote for me or my opponent, because neither of us will get anything done.
Yeah. that's
No, but
really
the small
interesting.
print was get out of Vietnam, and it made no difference if you're a freshman. The small print was all the things they wanted us to promise to do. All I wanted to do is improve subways in a Congress full of chairmen of committees who came from towns of under 50,000 people.
Mhm.
They didn't have any interest in subways. But Democrats and Republicans who live in New York, we all ride subways. So anyway, it's fun.
Yeah. All right. So it's some politics.
I'm a New
You've been
Yorker.
involved in so many other things, and then of course there's the Aston Martin story, right? So you jumped in there in 1975 and kind of rescued the company, which is doing well today. It's one of the most sought after brands in automobiles, high end automobiles, and that might not have been the case if you didn't jump in there to keep it afloat and to keep it going for a number of years. So how did that come about? How did you end up in that position?
Well, one, I'm an entrepreneur, so I specialize in getting into things that are a mess and nobody wants to deal with. And Walter Cronkite on Christmas Eve came on, no, a couple of days after Christmas Eve, and announced that on Christmas Eve, the Aston Martin factory had been locked and nobody could get into it, and it was bankrupt. And he came out with a black tie, which he didn't normally do for people. And this time he did it for a company. And why is Aston Martin dead? And I came down just before New Year's. My family was there. You know, wife, 4 kids, the usual routine. And I started complaining. They said, well, why don't you do something about it? So I called up a friend of mine in London, and I got another friend and said, if you can find the name of the managing director, I'll come over and talk to him. I had no intention of really doing anything about it, but they never let me in the factory before.
Right.
And then the press got involved, and the then managing director of the bankrupt company called up the press and said an American was coming over to save the Aston Martin car company. And I made the front page of every newspaper in England with the lead in, not Peter Sprague, an American millionaire without a name toured the Aston Martin car factory. And you want to get the press excited? Be a millionaire without a name. Somebody's going to see the photograph of you on the front page of the newspaper.
Yeah.
Might have been an old girlfriend or something, but whatever it is. And I just stuck it out because, frankly, and then I suddenly realized I loved the workforce and I loved the tools that were laid down. And I began to really dislike the guy who owned it, who wouldn't put any heat in the heater. And I just stuck with it. And I got 67 people said no. And a great guy named Alan Curtis said yes. And with practically nothing, we did it. But I couldn't have done it if I had been a hyphenated Englishman, like what they call Oxbridge, because they so resent the accent that nobody would have believed me. But most of our workforce came from Yorkshire, and I'm as down market as they are. I'm American.
Right.
They have very little prejudice against Americans because they've seen very few of them, and therefore they like us better. And so the net result is they trusted me, and I trusted them. But that gap is not easily done. There is, in fact, a class structure in England that gets in the way. There's even a class structure in the United States that gets in the way.
So in a certain respect, you were able to do what another Englishman couldn't quite do. You step in there and be relatable to the workforce in that manner.
Yeah, I suppose that's part of it. And part of it, I was lucky. And then my skill set is that I usually end up running things, and I immediately find people smarter than I am. And then I give them the job. And then I stay out of the way and cheer. But the fact of the matter is, you know, this idea that you've got this paramount leader, you know, blah, blah, blah. It was true at National Semiconductor. The guy who built the company was Charlie Spork. But I stayed for about 35 years because, one, I didn't irritate Charlie very often. And I loved what I was doing. And I lived on the East Coast and they were on the West Coast. And if I'd been there all the time, I probably would have irritated them to death and stopped being chairman.
Huh. Yeah.
Who knows?
And it's so interesting though too is that you were chairman for National Semiconductor. I mean, you were there from the mid '60s to the mid '90s, which is like, it's kind of like that's when the electronics industry exploded during that time. It's like from the mid '60s, like, I mean, what was it even, and compared to what it became in the '80s and the '90s?
I would love to talk about this, provided I get a little time for Badger, because the most interesting thing about it, and Isaacson's written about this in a book called The Innovators. Believe it or not, Tom Wolfe wrote an amazing article as part of one of his books, the Kool-Aid acid, guy, but boy, can he write. And it turns out, I can actually claim to have broken up Fairchild and Intel, because I got involved in a company called National Semiconductor in about 1961 or two. And I was 23. My father died. He'd been in the electronics business. I had enough money to put $75,000 in the company, which was a lot of money in those days. So they made me a director. I was maybe 24. But then life got very interesting, because we were in receivership. And it had been started by four roommates: Don Lucas, who went on to be head of Oracle, chairman, Bill Witter, Bill Vanderbilt. I don't need to say anything further. And Don Whedon. They were roommates. But I hung around Allen and Company, and I figured out how the pink sheets worked. And I went to the trader and I said, how do I get in the pink sheets? And he said, it's got to be legal. So I called up White and Case, and you could get in the pink sheets on the way to NASDAQ with 500 shareholders, 200 round lot holders who'd held the stock for at least 2 years and weren't officers or directors. And we met it. This becomes very important because we were a listed security on the way. And so the first group we hired out of Intel was Bob Weidler and Dave Talbert. And Weidler is the universally admired genius of the design of linear integrated circuits. His partner, Dave Talbert, was the process guy. And the girlfriend, who unfortunately is nameless, but I've got to get it, she cut the masks through which you shone the light to develop it. She cut those on her knees on a light table through a red rubylith. And they joined us, and we bought a company in California that was under Chapter 11 when we were under Chapter 7, got 35 acres of Santa Clara thrown in the deal, and hired these guys. And what they wanted was $800,000 tax-free in their $500,000 tax-free in their bank account in 5 years. And I had securities. So we made a deal. And a year and a half later, we were number one. But the important thing about that was, before that, the group that invented the integrated circuit and the transistor was Shockley Labs, to Berkman Instruments, to Sherman Fairchild. And they kept leaving. And Charlie Spork, who left the first major group before he was production, Intel was Bob Noyce, and technology, and the third one was AMD. He was going to take him to another company, Plessy. There were no VCs other than people like Jock Whitney. And then Intel picked up, but they got Arthur Rock. And eventually Arthur Rock and Bob Noyce funded Apple. But all of a sudden you had funny money to play with. It was kind of the equivalent of early 60s Bitcoin, but it was real. And when we hired Charlie Spork, our stock went from 3 to 24 in one day. But we made the deal with him. We met him on Wednesday in the Racket Club in New York, which sounds suitable for everybody's amusement.
Right.
And on Friday, 9 days later, he and Pierre Lamont and Don Valentine and Floyd Kwame and legends, 7 guys showed up. We gave them 10% of the company because we had a company that we could give 10% away of. We didn't have any money. We had funny money. but the funny money led to a couple of $1 billion companies. So it's very interesting that there was no venture capital really in the early 60s. And so to a certain extent, this had a major impact on how this all flowed, because after that, these companies all went public and they skipped the whole merge with General Electric, merge with IBM, be unhappy and try and figure out a way out.
Right.
They were all of a sudden running their own company. And the key to being chairman of a company with a bunch of people who like to run their own company is let them run their own company.
That's great. That's awesome. You know, I know you have a lot of stories. Tell about that. Like maybe I'll have you back to tell them another time, but I want to talk about your current project for right now. So you're
keep talking for a second. I have to plug it in. Hang on.
Okay, yeah, and while you're doing that, it's like I mean I know that you're passionate about this. This is a passion project, and so this is about allowing people with hearing, people that are hearing impaired to communicate with other people and making it kind of solving a problem of communication, and that allows people to talk that couldn't otherwise do so easily.
Okay,
and
Badger,
so,
are you working?
I'm
Oh,
here.
my God. Okay, hang on. I know.
So
okay, well, here's Badger, but I've got it speaking Spanish.
Awesome. All right, so
I'm talking
that
English.
Are on video, right? For those that are
okay, there's Badger.
Video.
It just was set this way. I'll let it talk English in a moment. Let me see if I can get it clear. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So
the idea was, but let me just
to give you a little context for those.
Okay, I'm going to do something fun. I'm going to take it out of.
Peter, if you give me a moment, I just want to give it some context for those that can't see what's going on here. So essentially, what we have is a device. It's a relatively miniature device, probably about the size of the palm of your hand, which has a screen. Kind of looks like a Kindle screen. It uses e-ink, and essentially what it's doing is it's providing captions for the things that are being said. And essentially, and while, so it's like, imagine if you're on video and with someone, and you held this device up, this little screen, which provides text and it provides captions. So you're basically captioning yourself, and then add on to it, and there it is. It's saying the words that I'm saying, and then add on to it the fact that you could also have it simultaneously translate between languages. It's really, really fascinating innovation. So anyway, that's the background for those that can't that are listening to this on a typical podcast and can't see what's happening on the video, which will be on the YouTube channel. So let me kick it back over to you, Peter, to talk about it.
Well, I was holding it up on my screen, and it was putting captions on you.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I have earphones in because I'm partly deaf, so I'm not hearing this in real sound, but otherwise I could put captions on you in Russian. All I have to do is say, Badger, input English, output Russian, hold it here, take my earphone plug out, pick up the computer audio, and what you say will come out in Russian. That trick is only going to be about 3 weeks away. So now I have to actually hit here, English to Russian. But it's very simple. But it becomes interesting in terms of patents, because when you patent this, you don't talk about the fact that the brains are in a smartphone. The brains are in a processor, which happens at the moment to be located in a smartphone. Eventually, I want to move the processor into Badger. This weighs 1.3 ounces, and it runs on lithium-ion batteries. But its trick, and the real trick that made it work, is that there's a company called E-Ink in Taiwan, founded out of MIT. And the students there left with their professor and sold it to a group of Taiwanese investors for $300 or $400 million in 2003. That's because they have the order for Kindle. And it's now a couple of $1 billion company in Taiwan, and we're their hot product, except that they didn't know that this product existed because, among other things, their screen takes 6 seconds. This screen takes 1.5 seconds. To do that, you had to know they existed. But the nice thing about that is if this is worn by your doctor, and your doctor is talking to you, and then he leaves the hospital to take a walk, or God knows, probably not smoke a cigarette, and his battery ran out, he couldn't get back in. But in our case, when the battery runs out, it goes back to a permanent display. Hang on. Hang on. Come on. Yeah, it goes back to this, which is the doctor's badge at the Veterans Administration, where over 100,000 people have hearing problems. It's bigger than post-traumatic stress. Costs more money. Then put on a mask and try and talk through the mask and a plastic shield, and you're deaf. So the idea came from a program on CNN. The key to invention, if I can make the final comment, I don't know how close we are to the end. There's an absolute key to invention. Being lucky enough to find a problem. You can't get up in the morning, pound yourself in the back, tell your wife, girlfriend, or what have you, I'm an inventor, and go sit down in a cubicle. You got to have some good luck of somebody who says, the door keeps slamming, and you say, oh my God, why can't I put a rubber wedge under it? And on we go. So I have a very funny letter from my grandfather. I'll send you, you can put it in the program. But my grandfather was an orphan who ended up inventing the trolley car and the elevator. And it's Frank J. Sprague, and you look him up in Wikipedia, and there are a bunch of books. And I have an actual original letter that reads like email. And it says, Edison, this is email, this is handwritten. Edison, as the boss chemist, I think you might be able to help me. I have an idea that you can draw on a piece of paper with some kind of ink that's conductive. And I thought you might have an idea for the formula. And Edison wrote on the bottom, Sprague, I think you should try a reduction of copper. And there were 2 other formulas. Ed. It read like a modern email, know your distinguished self, and oh my God, can I kiss your feet?
Right.
You guys thinking about something. And my grandfather had been fired by Edison, who wrote him a letter that said he had no future as an electrical engineer. This was before the trolley car and the elevator. So he won the Edison Medal. And the year after Westinghouse, and Edison was in the audience not with a hearing aid, with an ear trumpet, a big reverse megaphone.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather had the greatest pleasure I think any of us will ever have, which is reading the letter, you have no future as an electrical engineer, into the hearing aid of whoever wrote you that letter.
Right. That's amazing.
When you're on a stage. But I mean, the key thing is 1, believe you can do it. And 2, look around for problems worth solving. And I'm busily going deaf, so I may need this invention. So I had a problem. And half of your viewers, if they actually sat down and thought about it, what problem would they like to solve? At least it's a beginning. And then after they think they got an idea, they should try it on a few friends. And after that, they probably should call a patent attorney.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. One little
comment. I'll send you the letter tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And so Peter, anyway, if people want to get in touch with you or learn more about you, how do they go about doing so?
Okay, you go to Peter Sprague, peter@sprague.com well, that's my address. You go to LinkedIn, Peter Sprague, or you go to the name of the company is Satellite Display. We couldn't get the URL with an S, so it's Satellite spelled normally, display, no S.com. And when you get there, you'll discover now I'm going to get my host in trouble, but we went public on Start Engine last Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
So we're doing this in California. So you will discover that you could actually invest in this. But the reality is we're just going after the market of everybody who's deaf or hard of hearing, or has somebody they need to or would like to talk to in a foreign language. And that's an adequate market. So we'll see how we do. But we built it and it works.
Yep.
And our engineers are in Seattle, Montreal, and come on, Kiev, Ukraine. And we operate the same way. My engineers grew up in a deaf family. I love this project because there's nothing abstract about it. It just helps people's lives, we hope. So down we go, which is the company motto. We sign everything, not cheers, but on we go. So
that's amazing. And I just want to add to that too. There's also, we also have Sprague.com, which has a lot of interesting, it's kind of like a link tree of connections to different articles and different interesting info about Peter. And Peter, I just really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview and to be on this program.
Well, I hope your viewers are as lucky as I am, because I'd been on a 3-hour conference call before this. And so I decided to get a glass of wine on the side. So if I sounded unusually garrulous, I hope some of the people who are watching this will watch it and follow my example. And thanks very much, Rich.
Absolutely. Cheers to everyone. And thanks again, Peter.
Thanks for listening to Innovations and Breakthroughs with your host, Rich Goldstein. Be sure to click subscribe, check us out on the web at innovationsandbreakthroughs.com, and we'll see you next time.